Howdy, howdy, boys and girls. Eugene. Let's talk about hardware. Boy, howdy. Some of you boys and girls, you strip and mangle the hardware on these bad boys here, and then you get mad and you blame the hardware. Problem isn't the hardware. There's nothing wrong with the hardware that comes with these kits here. You just got to know how to properly service it and use it, and you're going to be in good shape. Now, there is two fasteners I recommend we replace, and I'll get into that later, okay? But the main issue is not the hardware. Repeat after me. The main issue is not the hardware. The issue is you over-tighten these things as you have these highly developed muscles in your hands and your arms of just years of conditioning, you're super strong. Things aren't fitting right, and you wind up over-tightening your fastener to try to compensate for that, then you wind up stripping stuff. Instead of investing in an upgraded hardware kit, let's get you one of these here. Get you a torque wrench. Learn how to use a torque wrench. Okay? Get you some hardware. 6 millimeter, 8 millimeter. Hell, even let's throw in some 10 millimeter. They're not that expensive. And I'll put a link down below showing you the torque values of a link for a chart with all the torque values for metric fasteners. Set your torque wrench and properly torque them. Then go back and use your torque wrench and find out what it takes to strip them. Do about 4 of them, okay? Then go back with the wrench and figure out what it feels like. Number 1, to properly torque it. And number 2, what it feels like to strip a fastener. That'd be a great learning experience for you. Like I said, you don't need upgraded hardware so much other than these 2 areas that I'm going to go into, but you need to learn what it feels like to properly torque things down. Now, I come from experience. I used to work at a computer manufacturing plant, and I was in charge of setting the torque values on all their assembly tools. So I know a thing or two about torque. So there are 6 areas where we have the biggest issues with hardware. Okay, number 1 are the screws here that hold the magneto, the coil. It's the magneto loop onto the engine case here. And if you ever tried to remove one with a screwdriver, it's hell to get these things out. They get pretty tight in there. I don't know if they're using locking compound on it or not. I recommend using an impact drill, or if you want to go old school, a hammer powered impact tool. Make sure you get the right size bit, you got a good fit. I don't care what you're using on if you've got these Phillips screws here, be it a hand driver, the impact drill, or the hammer powered one. You got to have a good bit that fits in there in order to get these screws loose here. You got to break them loose. Once you get them loose, I recommend you don't use thread locking compound here. Okay, these guys here, once they get in there, they get baked in, okay? So you don't need to worry about that so much. Use the right driver, all right? So the case screws on these bad boys here oftentimes are Phillips, and they can be rather difficult to remove. Once again, that's where your impact drill driver is going to come into place here. And particularly if first time you ever go to remove one of these clutch case covers or the magneto cover, you're going to pay hell removing that sometimes here. So just using the right tool is going to help you with that. You don't, like I said, if you do get a kit, most of them nowadays are coming with the Allen ones here, and sometimes they'll have their problems too. If you don't get that Allen in there just right, the Allen key or wrench in there, you can strip these out here too. So they're hard to remove once you do that. Next up, it's a hardware issue. It's a going back and resetting the torque issue are the acorn nuts on your cylinder head. They come with a flat washer, locking washer, and an acorn nut. I recommend take all of those, throw them in the trash. Let's go with a standard 8 millimeter hex nut. And these bad boys here, if you can find them locally, okay? If you can't find it locally and you want to just going down the road, of course, get you a, maintain the flat washer and the lock washer, and just upgrade with the 8mm hex nut. But this guy here is a Belleville washer or a spring washer. It's dome shaped, so as you tighten up your hex nut against it, it will flatten out and maintain a spring tension on it, which will help keep your head torque down properly. With these Belleville washers, you don't have to torque them real heavy. I mean, about 10 foot-pounds of torque is going to be absolutely fine with these here. 12 foot-pounds of torque on your cylinder head. Many of you, like I said, you're over-tightening things here, and these soft aluminum head gaskets will go through hell, okay? So if you can't source your Belleville washers locally, check the link down below there. I'll hook you up with 5 of the Belleville washers, 5 of the 8mm hex nuts, and a head gasket and a cylinder base gasket, so you'll be in good there. Now, of course, if you keep blowing head gaskets, it can be over tightened, but number one, even with a brand new engine, I recommend you pull the head and you inspect it. Inspect the sealing area of the head itself. Make sure there's no pits, deep gouges or scratches. Check the cylinder deck where your gasket is going to be seating. Check all of that out, and while you're at it, that would be a good time to set the squish, but that's more advanced, but we'll get into that on another video here. So you need a good sealing area here on your cylinder, good sealing area on the head, and I have seen brand new head gaskets be defective. So stock up on some head gaskets. If you're going to run these, you're going to want to keep them around. And so you're not blowing them all the time. What you're going to do, you're going to properly torque it down, like I said, with the Belleville washer, 10 foot-pounds of torque. With the lock nut and flat washer, 12 foot-pounds of torque will be fine. You're going to warm it up about 4 or 5 cycles. Basically, you get on it, you ride it, you get the engine up to operating temperature, you let it cool down. Just go for your normal rides, but after a couple of rides, you want to go back and check all 4 of your head nuts here and make sure that they're evenly torqued. You don't need to get these things super tight. I know you got the strength, but you're also going to wreak hell on your gasket if you start over tightening this here, and that can cause some problems too, okay? So just make sure that they're evenly tight after 4 or 5 warm-up cycles, and you should be good to go on the hardware for the head. One of the big issues you guys have with these here and hardware related are breaking these studs here, and this is the rear mount of the engine, and that mounts to your tubing here on your seat tube of your bike, okay? And if you have a gap, I'm exaggerating here, even that much of a gap on the top, the bottom of it, the studs are going to be torqued. You can even bend the studs trying to get things tightened up. Your engine flops loose, so of course you go, I can fix that. I can just tighten the living daylights out of it, and you wind up stripping stuff. If you've got a gap, there's a reason why you got a gap, and that's because the engine isn't fitted properly. So the first thing I do when I install an engine on a bike is I make sure that I've got a good contact here with this engine mount saddle piece that I call it, that there's no gaps, that it's firm against it. Then I push the motor down and I figure out what I need to do for the front mount. And yep, some of you guys do have problems with the front mount. And your front mount bolts onto the engine here, okay? And then you can either have this below it or going up, whatever works best for your frame. So then we've got to close the gap and make sure that this guy here has a good mount onto your down tube, okay? Let me get it like this here. Okay, so if you're at a knife's edge here, you're going to be torquing, putting a lot of stress on the U-bolt here if it's got a gap. If you can see daylight there, you're going to have to work real hard, and people wind up getting this too tight and stripping this out here. What's the fix? Well, sometimes I've even bent this plate here, like I have here on this YD100 I installed. What I did is I put the plate in a vise, beat the heck out of it with a hammer, and then just kept working at it to get it the correct shape to where it would fit on the front of the engine, and then of course to get as much contact area as I can on the down tube of the frame. That way the engine is not going to move. It's held firmly in place, and it's held in place basically by the bike frame. That's what you want. You don't want to have all this tension on your fasteners in order to try to get this thing in place. The fasteners, in this instance here, they're just there to help just kind of keep it in position to where it's not going to get knocked out of position, okay? So use your brain, not your brawn in this instance here, okay? All right, an area of misery for many of you, hardware-wise, just the overall issue, the chain tensioner. We all know that if you don't get this chain tensioner properly fastened to your chainstay part of the frame, this guy can flop over into the spokes. You instantly lock up the rear wheel. Your teeth, your head is now traveling at a fast rate of speed towards the hard road, concrete, asphalt, whatever, and that's not fun. We don't want that to happen. So some people have some issues getting this properly on there, and as well, because they're safety conscious, they inadvertently sabotage themselves by over tightening this here. If you don't get a good fit here, maybe even I've seen some bikes to where this inner diameter of the chain tensioner, the mount on it here, is real close to the outer diameter of the frame, and it no matter how tight you get this here, you're not going to close this gap anymore. So what you do is you can lay this down and take a hammer and give you some good blows here, and you can flatten this out a little bit and close that gap some and make it tighter. Don't you dare put rubber in between the frame and this chain tensioner. If you do, I'll come to your house and knock your garbage cans over, okay? Because that can help this thing flop into the spokes. No rubber, all right? These are 6mm bolts that are on this style of chain tensioner here. I like these here, even though you can't get these as tight as the 8mm ones, the ones that have the 2 bolts in it, the 2 8mm bolts. But you've got plenty of surface area, and it's a little bit wider, appears to be in my memory. But having 4 fasteners on it, you get a little bit better pressure on it and get a little bit better bite. Now, one thing you can do and just forego all the stress of a chain tensioner altogether, of this style of chain tensioner, is go with an arch tensioner like I got here. And if you're interested, I'll be happy to sell you one of these here that has the skateboard wheel, okay? So check the link down below if you're interested in that type of chain tensioner. All right, so this one here causes a lot of grief for many, and I'm going to tell you what, don't feel pregnant, because I had my rag joint blues when I first started building these here, and the chain popping off, and I slowly learned to master the rag joint, okay? Now, some of your rag joint kits, and I recommend you use the rag joint, but that's another video. I recommend you use the rag joint. Just learn how to set it up correctly, and I'll put a link down below showing you how to correctly set up a rag joint. Some of the hardware kits come with these spring tension lock nuts. That's bad. That's a bad choice. There's nothing wrong with the fastener. It's just, to me, it's a poor choice, because you run it down on your screw, on your bolt that is, and then if you ever need to remove it to service it, it screws the threads up trying to take it off, and it makes it very hard to take off, and while you're doing it, you're just destroying the threads. So get rid of that, and let's go with a proper nylock, 6mm nylock nut. And I recommend you go to the hardware store and just get you a whole box of these things, because these little kits and bikes are loaded with this particular fastener, and this is a good fastener to have. Okay, so if you don't properly fit your rag joint on your bike, as we know, it's going to wobble around, the chain's going to slip off, because you've only got just enough, you can only have a little wiggle room when this thing spins around, side to side play on this here, no wider than the inside of your chain, and that's not that thick. So sometimes the issue is you're not properly evenly tightening up the hardware here, and that's key. You need to evenly tighten up the hardware, and you need to check it and make sure that it's true and it's not wobbling side to side. But one of the things that can make it out of balance real bad are these rags here. I have seen some of these rags here be almost twice the thickness on one side as they are on the other. And of course that's going to make your sprocket do the wobble thing. When I install it, I look through my rag joints and pick the one that is the most uniform thickness throughout, and I use that as the one that's going to go against the sprocket. That way the sprocket is going to be easier to true. Okay, so then you've got your plate, you've got a flat washer, then comes the lock washer. I know it's a little overkill, but I just go ahead and do it that way. It's the way I've always done it, all right? And then you put on your nylock nut, okay? What I then do is I use my trusty 1/4-inch ratchet with the wobble drive on it here. I'll put a 10mm wrench on the nut and then use my ratchet on the outside, and I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do that all the way around, and then slowly work it. Work all of your bolts around. Start with this side here. Go to the opposite side, then go one, go over, and slowly work your way around evenly, and kind of count the threads as you go. And then once you get it almost there and you got your nuts fairly tight, and like I said, it's a feeling thing. You can strip these out here, but once you get the feeling of the torque values of how much pressure you can apply that's still within the safe range, then you go back and true your sprocket, making some minor adjustments. Okay, so the trick isn't to tighten these things far beyond their capacity and stripping it. The trick is getting them evenly tight and setting it up. And I got a link down below to show you how to set up, in more detail, how to set up a rag joint. Okay, well, I hope I've helped somebody. I hope you've gained something from the insane ramblings of this old dude here. Hopefully I didn't listen to too much Willie Nelson, and I got a few brain cells left that function. If you like the video, give me a thumbs up. Click subscribe. I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. I've got arch tensioners. I've got the upgraded hardware for the cylinder head listed down below, torque wrench, all that good stuff. Later, my friends.